And Patrick Minnis is on the line now. We'll find out anyway and see. Patrick, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Glad to have you with us. And could you give me, what you do, how you are involved in this?
I've been doing research on clouds and their interactions with solar radiation and infrared radiation for the past 25 to 30 years or so. And I've been working with studying contrails since about 1994 as a certain class of clouds.
So you mean as opposed to other kinds of clouds, these are clouds that are created by airplanes?
Yeah, these are basically cirrus clouds that form because the aircraft flew through a moist layer in the atmosphere. And it can be differentiated from a normal cirrus cloud in that it would not have formed otherwise naturally because it was started, what you might say, artificially by the injection of water vapor from the aircraft exhaust.
Now, there are certain, I'm sure you are aware of the controversy, or the chemtrails people.
Yes.
They say they are putting chemicals in the air. And where does that come from? And do you find that there's any truth in this at all?
I have not seen anything that would convince me that there's any truth in it at all. I'm not sure where it came from originally. We had an experiment back in 1996, and we made some reports on it in 1998 that got a little bit of press. And what we demonstrated was that these contrails that you see in the sky can actually spread out and form cirrus clouds, increasing the cloud cover. And shortly thereafter, this phenomenon sort of arose, and I'm not sure if that had anything to do with its beginnings or not, but or maybe it was just coincidental. But since then, it's taken off, and a lot of people are buying it.
Well, and yeah, they seem to be. There's a website, William Thomas, I think, willthomas.net, and he seems to be one of the leaders in this.
Yes.
Chemtrails out of the closet, and he's written all sorts of articles on this. Could these not chemtrails, but contrails, I got to keep getting my phraseology right here, the contrails, have anything to do with the harsh weather that the world has been seeing?
I doubt it. We've recently performed a number of studies showing that contrails cause an increase in cirrus clouds, and over the United States, it's been increasing about 1% per decade as a result of jet aircraft exhaust. But the climatic effect is from marginal to significant. It's still an unknown factor, but the most recent study by Jim Hansen and his group at NASA GIS recently showed that you'd have to increase it by a factor of 10 in order to get something that's significant. I see.
So, with all this controversy from the other side, there are a couple of reasons I could find that they say why it's being done. One was to cull people out, that there is a group of people, and this sounds so science fiction that it's hard to get behind, but a group of people, a large group of people, have been inoculated against these chemicals, and the chemicals are being put out in the air to kill off those who haven't been inoculated.
It's very, very speculative. No one has ever shown any studies showing a particular population being culled out by anything other than the diseases that we normally see. It's scientifically implausible because if you were to release something at the altitudes where contrails form, that is commercial air traffic flights at around 35,000 feet, you could never be sure where your whatever agent you're using is dispersed and where it's going to end up, because the connection between the surface and the atmosphere at that high altitude is very, very tenuous.
Well, just to keep microorganisms alive at that area, at that height, would be difficult, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would, and even if it were a particular poison, you would have all sorts of unintended consequences that would result in who knows what disasters around the world.
Yeah, and if folks, if you have questions or comments, you'd like to join in the conversation with Patrick Minnis, we're at 476-2800 or 1-800-655-5877. Give us a call and join in here. If you, especially if you take the side that this is them are doing this to us, because I can't seem to find in reading anything who is doing this. Although they do refer to the Air Force and a fleet of white unmarked planes, which is a great move from the black helicopters, I guess.
Yes, they're a little bit higher altitude, and I don't think I've ever been able to read what's on an airplane that flying at 35,000 feet.
Well, you just need some glasses, more than likely.
Yeah.
But these people say there's no markings on these planes, and that one guy. Two guys claimed that they were in, I think it was Chicago, and they were driving towards the airport, and one came over very, very low, and they could see that there was no markings on it at all, which is convenient, then, because that way is no way to trace it.
Yes. Well, there probably are some planes that are not very well marked. That's probably not unusual.
There's also something about the spectrums of color that are used in some way determine that what's coming out of the planes is not is chemicals, and some kind of fourth order spectrum of color with birefringence, which I looked up. It means two kinds of refractions in going through water or glass or light of some kind. I don't know if you know anything about that particular theory.
Well, there's been a number of people have commented that these various colors they describe as being like an oil slick or something, are really optical phenomena that we encounter in nature all the time from ice crystals. It's very interesting to.
Well, they're saying the colors that are coming up are not those that would be formed by ice.
That's because they're ignorant of what the atmosphere's ice crystals can do. There's a number of phenomena, especially the iridescence that's caused by the light interacting with very small ice crystals and small droplets in the atmosphere. And these are precisely the kinds of crystals that are formed immediately from the exhaust of an aircraft. These small crystals can cause this iridescent kind of a greenish purplish color that does look like an oil slick to the untrained eye. And if there's many different phenomena caused by scattering of the light by ice crystals of different sizes and shapes in the atmosphere, and these have been covered in numerous books and probably some online references that one could look up very easily.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was looking up stuff. Listen, we've got some callers here. Let's start taking a few. And if you would like to join in the queue, 476-2800, 1-800-655-5877. We're talking with Patrick Minnis about contrails versus chemtrails. And let's go first to Judith in Watsonville. Hi, Judith. You're on the air. Thanks for calling.
My comment has to do with, my understanding is that basically that clouds are formed by humid air in motion, and that if the air can be humid, and if it's still, then the cloud won't be there, and that what causes the contrails is the perturbation of the air. And my brother was an Air Force pilot, and I went to his graduation from flight school, and saw a film of their training jets flying up at high altitude, and you could see the contrails actually coming off the wing tips. They were not coming out from the engine area at all.
Yes.
And I also know from having flown in airplanes that the perturbation of the air by the wingtips is very extensive, having been caught in a wingtip vortex.
Yeah, vortex. Yeah.
Point in another. So that's just my comment, and I don't know whether the exhaust fumes might add in one way or another to that.
Well, there's two kinds of contrails. There's the
contrails.
All right, Paul, go ahead. Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, there's two kinds of contrails. There's one form. There's a pressure contrails, and those are the wingtip vortice contrails that that form because of a rapid change in pressure right at the tip of the aircraft, and that lowers the temperature enough so that the humidity that the water vapor that's there reaches past saturation and forms temporary contrails. The ones that are generally discussed in this chemtrail discussion are mainly the ice crystal contrails that form as a result of the mixing of the moist exhaust from the aircraft. Combustion produces water vapor as one of its main products, and that temporarily raises the humidity high enough to form water droplets which instantaneously freeze, and these ice crystals will persist and even grow if the atmosphere is beyond saturation with respect to ice, and that's a phenomenon that most people are not really familiar with.
All right, well, thank you. Let's move on to Dee. Dee is calling from Santa Cruz. Dee, you're on the air.
Hi, Dee.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. Well, I had read something. Should I just go ahead?
Yeah, you're on the air. Go ahead.
I'm on the air. Okay. I had read something, some of this literature that people were putting out here.
Yes.
And so I got interested, and I live on a 6th floor, and I noticed a couple of times, this was 2 years ago or so, that there were airplanes, because the people in the articles were talking about this area particularly. And I noticed that there were aircraft, and I saw the contrails usually right about at dusk. And one day I was on the street talking to somebody about it, and it was like one of the businessmen here or something, and he seemed to know a lot about it, and he said to me that the aircraft that go into San Francisco International, they come over this way and they fly, and I guess mostly they were over the ocean, and they drop fuel. And I always thought, well, that made a lot of sense, what he said. And I thought, well, maybe that's what the people were seeing that were writing these articles a couple years ago, especially.
All right, well, let's let Patrick answer that. Patrick?
Well, I'm not sure about the fuel dumping. That may go on, but it certainly would not be enough to form a contrail that's visible for more than just a few seconds, because it would disperse rather quickly, gasoline being fuel being a very vaporous commodity.
Only a few seconds?
And, yeah,
Patrick,
go ahead.
She said only a few seconds?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you're probably seeing is a contrail formed by those planes before they come down.
But the aircraft were really low, actually.
Well,
I thought it had to be high in order for that to happen.
They do have to be, generally have to be high. They have to be below, at altitudes where the temperature is below minus 40 centigrade.
These were quite low.
I hear that a lot. People telling me that
if that was fuel and they were dumping it over a long period of time, it would be hard really to time it in any way, because it would be continuous.
Were you looking?
Coming out.
Were you looking off to the horizon?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult to tell the altitude of something that's on the horizon and how far away it is.
They started out. They were close. They were right over town and several times before they went out into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't like. They were like over the trees. Yeah.
All right, well, Dee, I'm going to move on. We've got a bunch of other questions here. Patrick, have you answered as much as you can on this particular question?
Yeah.
Okay, Dee, thank you so much. Appreciate your call.
Welcome.
Bye-bye. And let's move on. First, let me give you the phone numbers. There's a couple lines open. This has generated a number of calls, but 476-2800 will get you through, or 1-800-655-5877. Let's go to Fred up in Boulder Creek. Hi, Fred. Good morning.
Thanks for having this guest on. I wondered if you could clarify something for me. I became interested in this a couple of years ago when I used to see many more of those phenomena that people were calling chemtrails. And some of the people are saying, well, the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail is how long it lasts. Because, everybody's probably seen the contrails for a high altitude that goes over, and the ice crystals form behind it, and it lasts for maybe up to a minute maybe, or 2 minutes the very longest, and then it sort of gradually just disappears.
Mm-hmm.
But then the chemtrails, the definition is supposed to be that there's something beyond ice crystals in there, and they would last for maybe 10 minutes or 30 minutes. And I've seen some of those ones that have lasted for 30 minutes and even up to an hour, and then they spread out. Now, is that a natural phenomena, or is that a difference between the two? Or if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's just the world operates a lot of times in a continuum, and what you're seeing in the what they call the normal contrail, the one that will only last about 10 seconds or so, is a contrail forming in subsaturated conditions. That is, the relative humidity is below 100% with respect to ice. The ones that actually grow are not chemtrails. They are the contrails that form when the air is actually supersaturated. That is, the relative humidity is greater than 100%, so that water vapor keeps adding to the crystals that are up there, and then the winds spread them out. So you end up with a natural-looking cirrus cloud eventually. We've tracked these things for more than 14 or 15 hours, traveling from Houston all the way past Florida at times, and these can be an extensive addition to natural cloud cover. But somebody has arbitrarily said that one is contrails and the other is chemtrails, and they're both the same thing. They're just different parts of the continuum.
Well, that's very helpful, because I think that distinction is contributed to a lot of the misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Sure thing.
Hey, Fred, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. And that was Fred up in Boulder Creek, 476-2800, 1-800-655-5877. You can get in line behind Daniela and Bob. We're going to go to I believe it's Daniela. If I got that right, Daniela? Hello, is it Daniela?
That's correct.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Daniela.
I think that since I'm going to relate a few things to this. I heard probably in the 70s that doctors were injecting cancer cells into women, and then in the New York Times in the 80s I read that it was true, and they weren't doing follow-up studies. I believe that our government is in cahoots with mainly Monsanto to destroy biodiversity with genetic engineering, and the government is trying to pass something about weapons in space. There's also a program called HARP. I'm not sure if it's HARP or HAARP.
HAARP.
And that the government is trying to play with the weather, and supposedly with cloud formation and stuff like chemtrails. I read a story that was written by an airplane mechanic who said that he was curious about this, and it is true that airplane mechanics have very separate jobs. So there are only certain ones that work in this area or in this thing, or others work on another. And he said he actually went into the bathrooms, because the airplane mechanics that work in the bathrooms are a whole separate group of mechanics. And he looked around and he discovered extra piping through which he does believe that these chemtrails are released. And so I really wouldn't put it past our government that they're poisoning us or trying to experiment with us, because they do a lot of things that make the world more unhealthy and stuff like that. And if you want to read a little bit more about it from the perspective that these are destructive, you can go to a website called educate-yourself.org, educate-yourself.org, and they'll describe chemtrails. So
you can also go to Will Thomas's website, willthomas.net, and he has lots of stuff on chemtrails, too.
Yeah, okay. Well, I hope it's not true. I really hope that there are not people purposely trying to destroy the environment and people's health and experiment on us. So those are my comments.
All right. Well, thank you, and we'll let Patrick answer or comment on it.
On the radio.
All right. We'll talk to you again. Thanks for your call, Daniela down in Los Osos. Patrick?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment one thing on the idea that the government's experimenting on us. As I mentioned earlier in the program, when you release something at 35,000 feet, you really don't know what's going to happen. It's not a very controlled experiment. You can predict to some extent where it's going, but it would be so diffused by the time it ever reached the surface, and it could be thousands of miles away from where you released it, that you could not have any idea of predicting what's going to happen. And when these programs that are used for experiments, you like to have some idea of being able to predict what's going to happen. You couldn't do this from that level. Nobody's really ever put forth some idea of why they would be experimenting on us, why they would use aircraft at that altitude to do it, and furthermore, I'd just like to comment on the mechanic. A commercial aircraft is a very complex instrument, has lots of pipes going around, and it would not surprise me at all that one airplane mechanic would be able to know everything about an aircraft. And even if there were some extra pipes in there, who knows what it was for?
Yeah. Okay. Good explanation there. Let's thanks again, Daniela. Let's go to Bob. He's in Santa Cruz about conspiracy theories. Hey, Bob.
Hey, John. How are you? And guest.
Hello, Bob.
It strikes me that there are some conspiracies that are, let's say, implausible. There's talk about 9/11 being a conspiracy and AIDS being a conspiracy, and like this chemtrails thing. In my opinion, there's no science behind it. It's implausible. There were certainly experiments done with chemical weapons, MK Ultra or whoever, in the 50s and 60s. We know this. There was testing in San Francisco. This was very low altitude stuff, as your guest was saying. And the other thing I wanted to say was that clouds form around particulates, is my understanding. Water is adsorbed by particulates in the air. So it's very implausible. I think people are reaching, because life is so complex, they want to reach for short, snappy answers.
All right, Patrick, any comments on that?
Well, I'd have to agree. The simplest explanation is what we've explained, and you were hearing some mention about websites, you might try looking at websites that actually explain what's going on rather than speculating about it.
You got any you'd like to give out?
Well, I could give you mine. It's www- that's a hyphen, pm .larc.nasa.gov.
Okay,
and
so
there's a section on contrails there.
You can reach Patrick there. And thanks, Bob, for your call. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll move on here. Theodora, waiting patiently in Santa Cruz. Further explanation of the unusual forms of contrails. Theodora?
Yeah. Hi, John. Well, first of all, I'm sorry there isn't somebody who's actually researched this subject. I know Will Thomas isn't the only one out there, but I don't know who they are. But I'm sorry there's not a balanced program here, because this is important, and those of us who are concerned about this issue are not speculating. There's actually very much ample proof showing, people have been able to capture samples of the chemtrails when they fall, when stuff has fallen to Earth. There definitely are the evidence of patents that have been filed that show that, and that's what I wanted to bring out, that it's very likely that part of this program is related to global warming, and that part of what's happening is that what we've heard is that aluminum particles are being sprayed up in that atmosphere that help reflect a certain amount of the sun. I'm just telling what I've read. I'm not an expert on this, but that there are patents that show that this technology has been patented, I think back in the 70s, and it may be just coming to fruition now. But I'm more willing to believe my eyes. I see these chemtrails. I did not see them in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I can't. You're telling us that this phenomena is based on phenomena that are natural, which means we should have always seen this happening, and we haven't. It's been the last 10 years that we've really noticed. And these chemtrails, when they're laid down, often are laid in crisscross patterns. They're laid in You'll see streams across, and we've never before seen 5 or 6 contrails at a time staying up there for, hours and spreading out into clouds. We haven't seen this before. So to say it's suddenly, suddenly happening and it's just ice crystals. Well, the ice crystals were there before. They were there in the 60s. They were there in the 40s.
Theodora, let me interrupt you for just 1 second. We did get something, a phone call came in and said, well, one of the answers to that would be that there are more airplanes now than there were then, a lot more airplanes. So just so that there is some answer to that,
well,
at least.
no, because the airplanes have prescribed routes to fly.
Yeah, but there's still more of them.
There's still more planes, but they have prescribed routes. They don't do crisscrossing across, just areas. I've been in, not just Santa Cruz. Apparently this is in all the NATO countries, so it's not even just America. It's beyond our Air Force. But this is a phenomenon that's happening across Europe and here as well. And when you get out into some places, you'll see tic-tac-toe designs across the sky. And that's not how planes fly. That's not how routes are scheduled.
Well, let's let Patrick respond to here. Hold on, Theodore.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to address the idea of putting particulate matter up in the atmosphere to reflect solar radiation to keep the world from warming up so much. In order for particulate matter to stay up, it has to be in the stratosphere, and it has to be pretty high up in the stratosphere. There's been sensors flying for many years now, including the stratospheric aerosol and gas experiment, which measure the atmospheric composition at high altitudes. And they were quite easily able to see the effects of Mount Pinatubo eruption and other volcanic eruptions. But the stratosphere is clean, and it's getting cleaner all the time, unless there's another significant volcanic eruption. So that's a bunch of bunk. The next thing is that we haven't seen them. The idea that we have not seen them, I contend that people have not been looking up in the sky and noticing them. They only started noticing in the last 10 years because it became part of the, as I mentioned earlier, part of the media, what's been shown on television and radio, and also the internet. There's been a number of papers that have been published. One was by a man named DeGrand and his group in 1991 that used data taken in 1977 through 1979 using satellite imagery, and those pictures are published. And what they show is that contrails have been large enough and forming in tic-tac-toe patterns and converging lines and all sorts of things. Even back in 1977, Travis and his group did one in 1987 showing a huge number of contrail outbreaks. So these have been around a long time. If you look back in World War II bombers, you see in films, you can see the bombers producing enormous contrails. And these are only at 25,000 feet in a very cold area of Europe. She is correct in that it's occurring in NATO and over the U.S. It occurs over the ocean. It occurs in the North Pacific and the Atlantic. Wherever aircraft fly in the right conditions, this is what you're going to get. Tic-tac-toe patterns. Okay. The air traffic controls keep planes separated by at least 1,000 feet in altitude. They keep them separated horizontally by a couple of minutes. When they're flying at that altitude, often through the jet stream, you will produce a stripe from one. 2 minutes later, you produce a stripe from another. These follow each other. Planes going a different direction will produce a stripe going a different direction at a different altitude, and if it's all moist, they're going to produce contrails that over time build up and produce tic-tac-toe patterns. So these are all very easy to explain, and people have just ignored it left and right. Will Thomas and the other people who are propounding this theory do not give equal time to the contrails. Nobody's ever contacted me or anybody else other than to say they're chemtrails, tell us what you're hiding. They're chemtrails, tell us what you're hiding. And that's so there is a little bit of balance, and this is the balance of the show. As I understand, the producer tried to find somebody who would come on and provide the balance, and was unsuccessful.
That is true. We did make some calls and just couldn't get anybody to get on. And we figured that by calling we'll get people like Theodora who are proponents of this and can ask some tough questions. And Theodora, does that wrap it up for you?
Well, again, I'm not the person doing the research on this, and that's where having it be more balanced. I for one am going to believe by lying eyes rather than somebody who may be repping the lying government. Thank you.
Okay, Theodora, thanks for your call. And let's see here. We want to go to Tim in Santa Cruz. And I probably should tell you, you're listening to Central Coast Public Radio, KUSP. It's Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, John Sandidge. Our guest is Patrick Minnis, and we are talking about chemtrails and contrails and getting lots of different opinions and lots of great questions. So let's try some more here. This is Tim in Santa Cruz. Tim, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi, Tim.
Yeah, I'm also disappointed with the format of the program. I did hear you just say that you couldn't get anyone, but I think you should have worked a little harder. There is a group here in Santa Cruz. They have a website, Chemtrails 911. Maybe if you could have gotten someone from that group on the air.
Well, we could belabor this if you'd like, but what would be the point of that? We tried, we didn't, and that's just what we've got now. So if you want to participate, please do.
Right. My understanding from what I've heard of the chemtrail debate is that it requires an extreme difference in temperature, the heat of the engine versus the coldness of the air, that it occurs high in the atmosphere. I see these things low in the atmosphere. They last for a long time. It's even on hot days, and they last for a long time. And the way that I know a difference between contrail and a chemtrail is just watch it for a few minutes, and if it doesn't disappear, if it's hanging around, and like 20 minutes later you still see it. And also with the patterns, Theodore is right, and it's not just crisscross patterns. It's like stripes in the sky from one end to the other. And I know that the planes don't normally fly in those areas. I see them coming down to go over the hill, for their landing. But this is more like stripes across the sky. And also what they form into also is cirrus clouds. These thin, wispy clouds, and I've always heard that those are supposed to be high in the atmosphere too, but these are low in the atmosphere, and I'm even seeing them in movies now, where they get shots of the sky and there's like these stripes across the sky.
Should we let Patrick reply, Tim? You want to hang on?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Patrick.
Okay, yeah, I discussed that the formation of the stripes earlier. The stripes form because the planes fly particular patterns. They're parallel because they're coming from they're put in those flight control areas, and they're separated in time. The wind blows, so if you form a contrail along one path at time 0, and 2 minutes later you form another one, the one that formed at time 0 is going to have moved over, and now you're making a parallel contrail along the same path, and you end up with stripes in the sky. You do this repeatedly. There's 25,000 or more flights every day that fly at altitudes that can form contrails. So you have an enormous potential. All you need is the water vapor. As far as the height is concerned, it's very difficult to judge the altitude of a cloud, especially a cirrus cloud, or any sort of thin, narrow cloud from the surface. Typically, it takes a lidar or a comparison with an atmospheric sounding of temperature and humidity. This is something that we've done over the past. We've published papers on it. We've simulated flying aircraft. A colleague of mine, David Duda, published a paper with me a few years ago where we simulated by artificially flying, by taking the actual flight tracks of aircraft and flying them through the atmosphere, and we were able to reproduce exactly the pattern of contrails and generating cirrus that formed over Lake Michigan. It's not that mysterious. This is something that occurs every day, and it occurs everywhere in the world wherever the conditions are right and aircraft are flying through. So a lot of times we think we can judge the altitude or the distance of something, but when you're looking at the three-dimensional volume of the atmosphere, and a curving atmosphere at that, it's very difficult to know exactly how high something is.
Okay, Tim, anything you'd like to follow up with, or can we move on to the next caller?
You can move on. I'm still not convinced, and I'd like to see another show on this.
All right. Well, I thank you for participating.
Okay.
All right. That was Tim in in Santa Cruz. Let's go to Kitty. First, let me do this, and then we'll go to Kitty in Aptos. Hi, Kitty. Are you there?
Yes. Hi. A couple of things. One is after 9/11, there was quite a bit of emailing and messaging on the internet by aircraft controllers who had been noticing that their screens that they observed over the years had been getting hazier and hazier. And they couldn't understand what that was about. And then, of course, when the flights were all stopped, the screens were clear again. And someone...
The what was clear? I'm having trouble understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, the big someone. Who was involved in the...
Wait, could you wait a minute, Kitty? What were you saying, Patrick? You can't hear her or understand her?
I can't understand what she's saying. Something is clear.
The screens, the air traffic controllers...
The radar screens.
Watch for the air traffic.
Okay.
The screens were getting cloudy, and it was getting more difficult for them to actually see the airplanes on their screens. Someone came forward in the government and told them about the aluminum dusting, and the idea that's absurd because it would float to the earth, I don't think really holds water, because there is an increase in asthma, and there are a lot of different things that we can look at, and I agree we can't just assume that contrails are chemtrails, but I think that you also can't automatically assume that chemtrails do not exist, because you don't see any reason why they would, or even with your experiments, you couldn't. You seem to be able to recreate what people are calling chemtrails.
One of the things I'd like to, if anybody who is calling would like to help us, is a place we can go where there is some actual proof, because I did read through the Will Thomas site, and it was all speculation, so I have no place yet that I've been able to find any definite proof, and so maybe one of our callers can do that. Kitty, thank you for taking the time for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Patrick, you want to respond to that at all anymore?
No, I think I'll just pass on that one.
Okay, let's go to Sky in Monterey. Sky? Hello? Yeah, you're on the air. Is this Sky?
Yeah, this is Sky.
Okay, go ahead.
How's that for being on topic, huh?
Boy, perfect. All we need is Kim to call next, and we'll be fine.
Right. Okay, well, I just wanted to make a comment and a question. The comment is that I have lived here in Monterey, just within minutes of the Monterey airport, in this same house for over about 12 years now. And in about 1994 or 5, I was looking out the same kitchen window I've looked out many years before, and I suddenly noticed a tic-tac-toe or a lattice-work formation of clouds that I thought would be contrails, but I'd never seen a pattern like that through that same window before. And it's also not an area of the sky relative to my house or the airport that is a typical flyover pattern, for aircraft, because I watch the sky. These clouds, and that was what first got my curiosity up. I'd never heard of this question of chemtrails before. So I saw it first, and I started watching. By the way, I timed those clouds. 6 hours later, they were still there.
Mm-hmm.
They had dissipated somewhat in that they'd gotten fluffier and a little more obscure, not as clear in their lines, but they were still in a crisscross formation. And I was very concerned and puzzled about that. And so I started watching the sky, and I've seen it several times since. Usually they happen on days when there is a high overhead and clear visibility, usually a clear sky. At least that's when I've noticed it.
Yeah.
It's not always multiple lines, more than sometimes it's just a couple, and your previous caller mentioned they can be in a sort of a parallel formation, not necessarily crisscrossing. I've seen it several times, and I work in the allied health field, and I would like to mention that I have also taken note that several of my clients that have been clients for years would come in within 24 to 48 hours to get some health, to take up my health practice at my services, and because they'd had a sudden onset of sinus and nasal symptoms and throat symptoms. And I personally experienced this myself, and it was immediately, in fact, it was a day that a client and I had witnessed this, and he came in the following day, actually. He came in the following day with sinus and throat problems, and I had developed them overnight. In fact, that the afternoon that I saw one of these questionable chemtrails. So that was my personal experience, and so...
Sky, are you an MD? Doctor? I'm sorry. Okay, I just wanted to get where you were coming from with this. And let's give Patrick a chance to reply. I know we've talked a bit about the way these are formed. Patrick, anything you can add to it?
Yeah, you say you never saw them before through your window in that particular...
But I cannot hear Patrick.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Try it again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little better.
Okay. Yeah, you say that you saw that you had never seen them through that window before in that particular location. Flight patterns are generally fixed, but whenever there's some reason to divert aircraft around a particular phenomenon, like a storm or something like that, they will change, and you'll end up with planes flying in places they don't usually fly. So that could be one explanation for that. I don't know. The other is maybe you really hadn't noticed it before because there was something else going on or something else on your mind. Psychologically, I don't know, but they may really have been there that one time and never again. The other thing is associating the formation of contrails or chemtrails, if you will, with health problems. There may be a connection there between chemtrails or contrails and health in the fact that contrails tend to form when the pressure is starting to decrease as a low pressure system approaches. And my daughter had asthma for many years, and she still does, but her symptoms would always get worse whenever the pressure started dropping, and that coincides with warm air moving up from the south and rising and cooling off, and it's moist. And when planes fly through that air, they form contrails, and therefore you may have a coincidental connection between contrails and chemtrails. But when you see a contrail and you make the association that it's causing whatever malady may be occurring, is sort of akin to what happened in the Middle Ages and people would see a comet. There's really no connection.
I'm sorry, Patrick, we're just about out of time.
Okay.
And one question that came up that somebody had called in, and the rest of you callers, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to get to you, but they wanted to know why it's lasting so much. They're lasting longer, they said. Would you have any answer for that? A quick one, if you would.
They've always lasted longer. People just hadn't noticed them. As I mentioned, you can go back in old satellite photographs and see these things. And if you can see them, and photographs that are based on imagery at 1 kilometer or 4 kilometer resolution, they're big. And that means that they've spread out. So I think it's more a matter of actually taking more notice than was done in the past.
Well, I want to thank you for spending the hour with us. It's been fascinating.
Sure,
and,
it's been
a lot of callers, and thank you. What is your website once again?
www-pm, that's Pat Minnis, .larc.nasa.gov.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And I also want to give out the other one, WillThomas.net. He is pro chemtrails, saying that this is definitely happening. And of course, Patrick saying that it isn't, and the caller's divided here. Thanks for tuning in. If you want a protest demonstration, there's one Thursday, March 23rd, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.